So thanks a lot for having me again in 2025. I'll try to go through this in 20 or so minutes and then leave time for questions. But let's see how we do on this. So the title of the presentation is Rethinking Business Processes in the Age of Agentic AI. That's a mouthful, but look, I think we're living through an absolutely amazing period in history where the price or cost of intelligence is falling at an unprecedented rate. And in fact, I think it's fair to say that the marginal cost of intelligence is converging towards the cost of compute and energy. And what happens when the cost of something goes down? Typically, the demand for it increases. So thanks to that, we are living through an incredible revolution on the services side of the economy, which was simply not possible when everyone was trying to do things on Excel, right? So I think the same transformation we've lived through various industrial revolutions, we're now able to live for the service sector. And when we're thinking about using AI, using agents, using humans actually in that loop, we can think of it as a system, right? And the goal should be to maximize the value that is created as part of the system. So you have humans, you have analytical AI, something that people have stopped talking about, give or take, right? It's so much focus on generative AI these days, but analytical AI is still very much underdeveloped in a lot of companies. And there's a tremendous amount of value in mixing these three elements of humans, generative AI, and analytical AI to maximize value. So the question becomes, do you want humans in or out of the loop? In the same meeting, I've had people say that they want to fully automate coding, and other people saying they absolutely need a human to oversee everything. So probably the truth is process dependent and somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. But I think it's clear that in a world where analysis is cheap, the question really becomes what to analyze, right? When coding becomes very simple, the question is what code should you be doing? If building an app is trivial, and we're getting there, the question is what sort of app should you be building? So I think that for better or worse, the humans still need to direct the system at least for a while. And maybe in the distant future, we'll have a business process as a prompt, right? You write up your business process and it gets created for you. And then further down the line, maybe an entire firm is a prompt, and maybe the first unicorn, billion-dollar valued company built by a single prompt. I have no idea, but again, it's not for the near future. We still have a role to play. Good news. Um, the question I think within corporations is it's easy to encourage people to use ChatGPT, Claude, etc. And you can see that their personal productivity is going up significantly. But this is not necessarily impacting the bottom line, right? It's not increasing, or at least we're not seeing it in the bottom line of a lot of companies. We're seeing it for technology companies, and they've been doing a lot of restructurings. But it's not, for the most part, allowing corporations to increase their revenues yet, um, or reduce their costs. And I would posit that this is mainly because we haven't really been rethinking processes, the individual processes that form the value chains of a corporation. We haven't really been rethinking them within the context of having access to humans, analytical AI, and generative AI, right? We've just been adding things on the top of existing processes. So great for personal productivity, not so great for corporate productivity. So how do we rethink processes and the role of humans within these new patterns? One way, of course, is expert brainstorming. You can get together cross-functional teams. You can even use machine learning and optimization science to figure out how you should rethink a process. But there's some real challenges, and a lot of them have to do with the humans in the loop, right? First of all, not everyone is incentivized to think about how they might lose their jobs. Let's be honest. There's a lot of losses in translation as well. The technology people may not understand the details of the business. Frontline people may not know anything about technology or security or things that are critical in rethinking these processes. Uh, there's a problem of imagination because unless and until you've restructured it, it's not so obvious to see what it's supposed to look like. um, Very often the data layer is not AI ready. So you're used to doing something in Excel, you're used to getting flat files. That's not a process that you can automate quite yet. And maybe the data is siloed between different groups. So how do you bring it all together to maximize this value from this system? Code similarly often comes from having been built in different languages. Some of it is new, some of it is old. It's not going to be entirely obvious how you bring it together and make it flexible enough that you can come up with new ideas, new processes in a secure manner. Um, I think there's a lot of diseconomies of scale, and it's quite fascinating to see the speed at which startups and, of course, hyperscalers are able to come up with new products, whereas a lot of larger companies are struggling with re-engineering their processes. So, to me, the explanation is, if you're big, there's a cost associated with that. And then there's the whole issue of security. So, I don't think anyone is looking to blow up a firm by restructuring a process. So we're all aware that security is a big issue. But sometimes, especially in larger companies, this is kind of used as an excuse for everything, right? It's as soon as someone says, "Oh, it's not secure," then you stop, and there's nothing you can do about it. So there is this dichotomy between making something as secure as possible, which is not all that useful at the end of the day, versus as secure as necessary. But it's a tough concept to sell in organizations where people jobs depend on it. So how can we use the BayesiaLab ecosystem to help us with this process reengineering, process rethinking? So, of course, you're all familiar with Becky, or more generally, expert brainstorming within BayesiaLab. I think it's a great platform for that. Helixia for variable elicitation, of course, and you can combine Helixia with experts. So I'd like to go through a small case study, which, as you may know, MSCI has many activities, but one of them is to provide sustainability ratings. And they do that across environmental issues, social issues, and of course, governance issues. So board scoring is within the context of governance, corporate governance. And it's a very important metric that a lot of investors are looking at prior to making an investment. So I thought, it would be useful to take that as an example, look at how it's being done today, and see if we might be able to improve it. That being said, I'm not going to suggest that this is in use at MSCI, neither the historical nor the forward-thinking part. It's more an exercise that I've gone through for this particular presentation. So uh, one of the ways that companies are evaluated, as I said, is based on the board's independence, right? And so within governance, you're looking at things like the ownership and control of the firm, the board pay, is it reasonable, the accounting transparency, the tax transparency, the business behavior, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all key items that in order to be able to provide a score, you need to be able to get from typically company documents. So what does the manual process look like? Well, unsurprisingly, you need to get the raw documents. Typically, those are filings with the SEC for US companies. It could be information from websites, and it could be documents that companies prepare specifically targeting the issues around environment, social, and governance issues. You need to read them and manually extract the various raw fields. Not easy, and then use some kind of method, some criteria to extract key metrics like the independence of the chair. Is it independent or not? Any sort of leadership concerns, any sort of negative press coming from the way that management is structured or that the board is structured. So these are things you need to have rules for, and obviously you need to train your humans. Each one of them needs to be able to know the schema for extracting this information. And then from there, you can create categories. So it's a little bit, it's a form of variable clustering, if you will, but done manually, right? So you have the key metrics, and then you create categories of key metrics, and eventually those feed into your corporate governance and behavior score, which itself will feed into your board score, and itself will feed into your governance score. So there's a hierarchy of these key metrics. Now, one of the reasons this is a fairly difficult problem is that we're not extracting things like revenues or EBITDA from a document that's filed with the SEC. We're extracting concepts like how skilled is a board. So it's not a raw metric, and therefore it's subjective, at least somewhat subjective. And we can try to make it less subjective, but as we know, in a manual process driven by humans, there's noise, there's bias, and so there's a limit to how how clean the extraction really is. So let's look at what an agentic process reproducing this objective might look like. I have a short video, hoping it works.
I wanted to show the latest available technology for parsing complex documents and extracting data from them. So here's an example of a climate risk report, not directly related to board composition, but still within the realm of sustainability. And the reason I've selected this report is that, as you can see, it has a lot of complex tables. It has some charts, it has some mathematical formulas. And if we go to some of the tools that are available today, such as Visual AI, I simply uploaded that document to Lending AI. And what it does, it's going to create a split screen where on the left-hand side, you can see the original document with bounding boxes. And on the right-hand side, you can see the extracted text. So from this chart, for instance, it says it's a circular diagram. And here are the different elements inside it: communicate on progress, TCFD aligned regulatory reporting, et cetera, et cetera. And then for tables, no problem at all. I've checked them. They're all absolutely correct. Companies' transition plans, correct. So as you can see, for this type of complex documents, it would appear that the problem of extracting text from them is now solved. There's even this graph that doesn't show any numbers on the chart, but the system is trying to approximate what it sees. So approximately 1, approximately 15 for materials. So this would be minus 15 here, and then interaction is approximately 4. So it works really, really well. The next great thing about this platform is that once we've parked the document, either in Markdown or JSON, we can also use the tool to extract some data. So if I click on extract here, you see that it's using a particular schema, and that schema was generated automatically by the system. So to do this, I can simply start anew to get another schema and ask the system to extract, as an example, all of the data that relates to climate change information. And it's going to create a schema automatically with that prompt, from the prompt. You can also play with it, add elements to it manually, but you don't have to. So it's a very powerful platform for creating schema on the fly. As you can see, you can start with a suggestion, prompt to schema, and then you can build it manually if you have to. And then finally, you can also chat with your extracted document, but of course you can do that via API or in ChatGPT once you have parsed it. But it's still nice to be able to ask questions like, what is the exposure to low carbon emissions for the portfolio, and to get a response that is accurate with the reference of where the information comes from. So how much can we actually push the technology? I think some of you might be familiar with this chart that Lionel used in his prior webinar on situational risk in Switzerland. And it's a very complex document. Even as a human, it's going to take me a while to read it and extract all the information that's embedded in here. So whereas Lending AI doesn't necessarily do very well on this document, there's other tools that do very well. And ideally, you have access to those tools and you can mix and match them based on your requirements. So in this particular case, I've used NotebookLM. I think a lot of you will be familiar with that platform. You can basically upload documents. In this case, I uploaded Radar, and it does a very, very good job on it. And you can see that it describes the source correctly. And if I want to ask a question of what are the main risks, it will absolutely be able to answer correctly, which I think is quite amazing. The other thing you can do with it is a chart, and you can see that you can click on the different areas. It'll ask specific questions based on your needs, and looking at non-proliferation, for instance, dual use goods, Syria, Pakistan, India, North Korea. So it's a very, very powerful platform, and even for something as complex as this chart, it's able to handle it no problem.
So I like these tools. I think it's pretty impressive. But again, we're extracting raw data, right? We're not able to extract concepts quite yet. So maybe we can start by defining the concepts that we need into atomic bits. That'll make it easier for an LLM to make sense of them and possibly extract them from documents. And ideally, we end up with a series of Boolean observations that we can build up to a score. So it turns out we can do this using Elixir.
So what I'd like to do next is to figure out the variables that are going to go into my network. And so in other words, how do I connect the key elements to a final score? And in order to do this, I'm going to use Elixia's automatic causal network generator. There's many ways of doing this, but the reason that I've selected the causal network generator is that I would like to get some binary variables that lead to a binary score, because those binary variables will make it a lot easier for an LLM to grade. So if you have a question that is true false, you can ask it directly to the LLM based on schema. Is this what you observe? Yes or no? And then get it to explain the judgment a lot easier than if you have non-binary variables. So that's one of the nice things about the causal network generator. So to get there and to make sure that I also have a binary variable that's the target in the end, I'm asking it to use the document to extract a framework for scoring corporate boards. And specifically, the target variable should be the board score is high, true, false, and high is 80th percentile and above. The general context is ESG ratings for board governance. I'm setting the description length and complexity and clicking OK. So we click OK, and this generates the graph, which I have already. So here it is. It's not necessarily the easiest way to look at it, so we'll be using HXMap in a second. But just want to emphasize that indeed the target is a board score that is high, 8 to 10, on a score of 0 to 8. And then I've added some nodes to better explain what the network is doing. And you can see here all of the questions that can be answered in order to get to a score. For instance, ownership structure favors minority shareholders. The comment has been created automatically, and there's just two states, which are true, false. We can also check that in validation mode, we're able to play with the different variables and that they will impact the target. So the most important one is the aggregate board governance quality, which makes sense because it's an aggregate. And if we set it to true, then the probability of having a high score is obviously very, very high that it's going to be true. So let me remove observations and then use something that's a little bit more realistic, such as diverse board composition. And if I set it to true, you can see that the probability of having a high score goes up to 90%. Well, let's have a quick look at this graph using HXMap. The first step is to use a layout that makes it easier to navigate. So for this particular case, I'd like to look at ELK horizontal. Let's see what that looks like. And that's quite nice because we have the target here at the bottom, and we very clearly see all of the variables that go into the aggregate board governance quality score that it itself goes into the target final score, which is high score, yes or no. Some of these variables, mandate board evaluation disclosure. Do we have a transparent board evaluation process? Do we have a robust board committee? Do we have high board attendance rate, etc.? So those are the variables that we can use as part of our scoring workflow.
So of course we can use Elixir for a variable elicitation that we've done, or a combined network. And by the way, of course, you might be creating the network with Elixir, but you're going to check it, make sure that you agree with the variables that have been extracted, and you can manually add some or get rid of some variables. And then the next step is to use BayesiaLab or some other tool for model building and scoring. So what is the model that we're trying to build? Ideally, we want to turn this into a supervised machine learning problem. Currently, we have a knowledge graph with the key variables, so we can extract these variables, and then we can use them to build a data set to predict historical scores based on these key variables. So in the past, we have generated scores manually. So we have a database of scores, right? And we also have a database of documents that were used to generate these scores. So the question is, how can we make these documents into variables of a supervised machine learning problem, with the target being the scores that we calculated in the past? And how we do this is, you know, using an LLM to create the data set, basically, with the target variable being the historical human generated scores from 1 to 10. This is what a data set might look like. You see that the target distribution of board scores is uniform, makes sense, between 0 and 1 or 1 and 10. And then each one of the binary variables is a feature. And the key is being able to extract them automatically from documents. So we can use historical variables because humans, as they're building to get to a board score and eventually to a government score, obviously they have intermediate data, they have intermediate values, but those may not match what we have in the expert slash Helixia created causal network. So we're going to have a mismatch of variables. So what we can do is use an agentic workflow to do that in production, or again, go back to using Notebook LM for prototyping. And given I really like Notebook LM, this is an example of what I've done for IBM. So in terms of the documents, I uploaded the ESG methodology that we use for scoring boards. And I uploaded all of the documents that were relevant for IBM. So about the board of directors, the website, webpage on their website, and then various documents like Meet the Board for IBM and proactive third-party risk management, governance-based strategy. Those were found automatically with the Discover capability of Notebook LM, but I did upload the methodology documents. And when you go into the studio option where you can create a mind map, you can create audio overviews, so podcasts that people are very familiar with. You can also create reports, which is a relatively new feature that I've used here because it will iterate in an agentic manner to create a table for you or a report, depending on what you're looking to do. So in this particular case, I put in a prompt for IBM Corporation, create a table that categorizes and scores the below information with yes, no answers, as well as explanations. And the variables are coming from our Helixia causal network, right? So do I have at least one independent director? Do I have adequate board disclosure? And of course, with the explanation, I can review the answer from the LLM and decide whether it's appropriate or not. And this is what it ends up looking like. It will iterate for a few minutes and then generate a table with each one of these key variables being filled out with a yes or no. So in this case, independent chair, no. Are there leadership concerns? Yes or no. At least one independent director, yes. And again, you have the explanation. So all of this, of course, this is just for prototyping because it's not meant to be for production. But the idea is that in production, you would be able to have all of these explanations reviewed by a human being. Clicking on them would get you back to the original document. There's many, many ways to control the flow of information and ensure that you don't have a system that's hallucinating. Now, if you want to put it into production, there's again many different platforms available. One of my favorite was just introduced by OpenAI. It's their new agent builder platform. And there you can graphically select your agents, graphically select your file repositories where you would have all the documents for IBM, and design a workflow that is going to work in parallel. So for each one of the agents that I have on the workflow, I have a prompt. So you're a helpful ESG analyst specialized in analyzing board structures, for instance. And then more specifically, I'm going to ask it to extract a specific metric, in this case, independent chair, yes or no. And very important for the productionizing of these agentic workflows is the output format that you can have structured, in this case as JSON. And so here I'm creating a response schema that is Boolean specifically, and I could add a description that could be useful. Actually, I should have done that. But the idea is I know that it's going to return a yes or no. And I'm also asking for an explanation. So there's going to be, as part of the JSON being returned, there's going to be the yes or no on the key variable, but also the explanation, which we can further process either by human or another LLM for this matter. So we're really breaking down the problem into these atomic questions that are fairly easy for an LLM, and probably not, you don't need GPT-5 for that, maybe GPT-5 mini or maybe even nano to do a good job. And the great thing about OpenAI's implementation is that you click a button and you get the code for this workflow that you can then implement. All right, once we have the data set, and the data set, if you remember, looks like this, where we have our features and then we have our target, which is the board scores, we can create a supervised machine learning network with that. In this case, I'm using BayesiaLab to do it. And there it is, right? So now we have a model. We have our key variables that were extracted by LLMs. And it's a big database of 100,000 board scores and 100,000 rows of features connected to that. And we can, make sure, of course, check that it makes sense. But now we have a model that is fully automated. So to conclude, my objective was to propose a way of restructuring processes to maximize the emergence of value from a system that is composed of humans, generative AI, and analytical AI. So I've used all three of those things, but did I really maximize value emergence? Maybe for the next 5 minutes, but then a new startup or one of the hyperscalers will come up with a new solution and make my presentation completely obsolete within the next 5 minutes. But such is the life that we're living these days. It's just absolutely incredible, the velocity of change. And we need to adapt because the value to be created is absolutely massive. Efficiency, of course, faster time to market with these revised processes, using less people, for better or worse. I think accuracy is much improved by doing that. People might argue with this, but I think you end up with something that's less subjective, avoids a lot of bias and noise, and you get to a much higher level of compliance and transparency because the models and the new processes can be locked in a virtual vault. I think that's a really interesting concept, that it's a little bit like version control on GitHub. You have your new process and your new code and your model and your causal graph that are in a repository, and no one is allowed to make a change unless it's approved, and then it becomes a different version. And you're always able to go back to the old version of the process and explain exactly how you got a score from what variables and how these variables were extracted from the raw documents, as well as the raw documents. So I think that's amazing. I also the models are not black boxes, so they can be explained, and you can unwrap every single part of a very complex process for maximum transparency. So this is how I would see the entire production process. Basically, you have your source documents, you have your agentic concept extraction, you have a transparent scoring model that is locked, and it's that model that is used and this logic that is used until such time as you decide to create a new version. Then, of course, you need quality assurance, which can also be automated. Guardrails are very important. Exceptions management can go to humans. Humans will supervise the entirety of it. And hint for BayesiaLab, it'd be ideal to have a single platform that does all of that, because I think it'd be solving a lot of problems, and allow companies to extract a lot more value from these great tools that are now available. Thank you.